Hello. So it's week 3 in our class on setting the scene in historical fiction, and moving into the idea now that we've built our world and developed the characters in it. How do we sort of move these characters through the scene? I call this populating the scene, but it also gives me a chance to talk about point of view. How do we choose as writers to tell the story? Um, how do we show the characters interacting with the world? How do we reveal the world through the way the characters interact with it? How do we show the characters kind of living in the world? And maybe touch a bit on, again, the idea of research, and then how so many of the things that we learn from our research end up maybe edited out or trimmed down so that the scene will convey sort of authentically and move the story along. So, um, in terms of, we have our world, we have our characters. Now they're going to be coming together and working together. And probably your first really big decision in how to tell the story, how to move the story along, is to think about the point of view that you're going to use. And I like to play with that a lot in my work. In Orphan Number 8, it's actually one main character through the whole book, but I use two different points of view. I have Rachel Rabinowitz as a child, and you see that in the opening chapter of Orphan Number 8, which again is available free online from the link. And it's third person point of view, somewhat omniscient. I mean, I kind of, when I want to know what Visha is thinking, I know what Visha is thinking. When I want to know what Harry is thinking, I know what Harry's thinking. Rachel's 4 years old. I mostly convey her through her action. She doesn't actually do a whole lot of thinking in that chapter. If you are thinking about third person point of view, sort of omniscient, the book I would encourage you to read is Bel Canto by Ann Patchett. That's a book I go to school on when I'm writing in third person and I want to be able to delve into different characters' thoughts as the chapter or the story unfolds. It's really amazing. What we're more used to in contemporary fiction, if you're working in third person, is a close third person, so that we have one character, that the narrator is speaking from the third person point of view, so they're a bit removed from the character. They can maybe see some things the character is a little bit unaware of, but basically the close third person, you're pretty much tying yourself to that character. Um, what does that character know, think, see, assume? There are ways to let the reader in on a few things that the character might not be aware of, but it's pretty limited. It's pretty subtle. You're very close. Why choose the third person instead of first person point of view in those cases? It's because sometimes you, as a writer, I choose. I don't want to only, not only don't want to limit myself. So let me try to say that more coherently. With a close third person, you're limiting sort of the reader's access to one particular character anyway. With first person point of view, you're further limiting the reader to that character's voice. And so it kind of depends. And when I'm writing, like I said, I like to play with point of view. So Orphan Number 8, the opening chapter in the tenement where Rachel's a little kid, it's third person, and it's past tense. Um, uh, what do we say? Rachel Rabinowitz watched her mother's bare feet shuffle to the sink. She heard water filling the kettle. Then she saw her mother's heels lift as she stretched up to drop a nickel in the gas meter. There was the sizzle of a struck match, the hiss of the burner, the whoosh of catching flame. Third person, it's not like, I'm Rachel under a table. It's, there she is. and it's past tense. So these things have happened in the past. So you're creating a narrative voice. And again, I don't create a narrator who has a lot of personality, um, but a narrative voice that is just slightly to the side of the action, that is telling the reader what's going on, that's maybe bringing the reader into a character's thoughts and coming back out again, showing the reader what's going on. And by using the past tense, the sense that whatever you're reading about, it has happened. That maybe the narrator might already kind of know where this is going because it has happened. And these are choices that are sometimes hard to narrow down. I rewrite things often. I'll write it in first person and rewrite it in third person to see which works better. In Orphan Number 8, Rachel Rabinowitz, the one main character through the whole book, but it alternates chapters where she's young and growing up in the orphanage. So I think she gets to about like teenager by the end of that part of the book. And it alternates with chapters where Rachel is already an adult. I think she's 40 years old and she's an adult. She's working as a nurse. And these are the chapters where she meets the pediatrician who conducted experiments on children in the orphanage when Rachel was little in the orphanage, and she was one of those subjects of this doctor's experiments. So the adult Rachel alternates with the story of Rachel's childhood. The story of Rachel's childhood, I chose third person point of view, partly because I sometimes want to see Rachel from someone else's perspective, and because I want to be a little bit removed. I need to know more. I need to be able to articulate in ways that a little girl couldn't. I need to understand bigger things than a little girl could understand. And it gave a different texture to those chapters. Those are the chapters in the past. That's Rachel Rabinowitz's childhood. Adult Rachel Rabinowitz, who is introduced to you in chapter 2, and then we go back and forth, we spend about a week in her life. So all of the chapters that are in the adult point of view are, the time frame is much more compressed, and she speaks in the first person. What does that sound like? Sounds like this. It looked like the radio weatherman got it right for once. It was going to be another scorcher. Even at 6:30 in the morning, the humidity was as stifling as a wool coat out of season. I'd only walked 3 blocks from the subway and already sweat was beating up behind my ears and dripping down my neck. I dreaded to think how bad it would get as the day wore on. That's Rachel speaking for herself, but now she's an adult. Also past tense. So we have 2 different points of view. Third person about Rachel as she's growing up, and first person Rachel speaking for herself as an adult, but all in the past tense. So you get a sense that whatever Rachel tells you from her own point of view, I did this, she's already kind of lived through it, but she's going to be telling you her own story like as you go. So there's a contrast between the 2 different chapters as the chapters alternate, and a contrast in point of view. You don't have to do that. You can be completely consistent. It's really nice for the reader. I think of Girl with a Pearl Earring. First person, jump in. I don't remember now if it's present tense or past tense. Probably past tense. Tracy Chevalier. Jump in, one character. She's going to tell you her story. You start, you move forward, and you get to the end, and it just grabs you and off you go. So that can be really great too. You may think of other examples where there are multiple points of view, multiple characters, and if that's something that you're going to choose, you have to be really conscious about it. Editors are always saying things like multiple characters and multiple points of view don't work very well, but a lot of writers do it and can be very successful with it. So you just have to have really good reason. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes I'll rewrite things in different points of view or different tense. I'll often write entire I think I revised Orphanate. I think half the book was in present tense and I brought it to past tense. I think I started it, even the adult Rachel chapters, I started in third person. And there was a point at which Rachel was like, I just want to speak for myself, like, get out of my way. And so I was like, okay, I'll revise you into first person, like, settle down. In my work, because I tend to really like a kind of alternating chapter situation, but it can be different things. It really depends. With Bachelor Girl, I alternate the chapters between two different speakers, Albert and Helen. And they're both first person, but they're two different characters. They're both in the past tense, they're both first person. And one thing I was kind of adamant about with Bachelor Girl is I did not want like labels at the top of each chapter saying who was speaking. And I regret that now because I think what happens is the first time you shift from one character first person point of view to the other, there's a confusion for like a couple of pages until the reader kind of catches on. And I thought that would be cool, but now I just think it was annoying for a reader. And it would have been nice to say Helen, Albert, and just a quick orientation. So I feel now that it was a choice I made that was not as considerate of my reader as it could have been. So two different main characters, both speaking in the first person, switching off. And then in the book I have coming out this summer, Counting Lost Stars, I did a first person point of view for one. It's two different main characters, Rita Klein and Cornelia. What's Cornelia's last name? Vogel. Oh my gosh. I just wrote this. The last time I read this was like a couple weeks ago. Rita Klein speaks in the first person. So we start the book with Rita Klein. And what I ended up doing in this book, I got even more considerate to my reader. It says, Chapter 1, Rita Klein, New York State, 1960, because we're going to alternate in time and stuff. So I was just like, don't stress, reader. I got you. So Rita Klein speaks in the first person, in past tense. And she opens, I first suspected they were lying to me when my skirt didn't fit. No matter how I tugged at the zipper or sucked in my stomach, I couldn't make the waistband bridge that gap of flesh between the hook and its eye. So there I stood, feet flat on the floor of the hospital room, flummoxed. They'd all promised, the doctor, the social worker, even my own mother, that I'd be back to normal once it was over. All I did was believe them. That's Rita Klein. She's speaking to you, but speaking in the past tense. And what that does is it kind of reassures you that this narrator is like going to still be alive at the end of the story. That even though they're going to tell it to you kind of as it unfolds and react to things in the moments that they're happening, that this narrator, this first person narrator, this character is going to come through it somehow. The other chapters in this book, in Counting Lost Stars, are about Cornelia Vogel, and they are set in World War II era in the Netherlands. They're in third person, again because it's very close for most of the chapters to Cornelia Vogel's point of view. Vogel, if you're going to speak in Dutch. They're very close to Cornelia's point of view, so almost entirely very close third person. But then I'm going to do some weird stuff with point of view later in the book where another character is going to kind of step in and take over one of Cornelia's chapters for a couple of chapters. And the pattern of going back and forth between Cornelia's story and Rita's story will stay. So I wanted the third person point of view, but I do it in present tense. And that's a choice, okay? Cornelia Vogel turns to the next form, places a fresh hollow earth card on the plate of her punch machine, and checks the clock. Only 3 more minutes until their supervisor blows her whistle to signal lunch break. Cornelia's fingers hover over the keys of the punch machine. I'm having a technical moment here. Hang on a second. I hope we're all back together, no problem. So the chapters are set further in the past, but I'm writing in the present tense. And that's a choice I'm making because I want it to almost feel like the character herself doesn't know how something's going to end. Like she does not know. Is she going to get through this? How is this going to end? How are her decisions going to affect things? She's like stuck in that moment. Present tense, it's always a trade-off. It gives you access to, there's an immediacy. A lot of the History Channel narration is done in present tense, which I find confusing since it's all in the past, but I think it's making the past feel a little bit more present. But writing in present tense is also very limiting. Technically, it's limiting. It's really, the character can have no more, they can't ever look back on anything for like I'm in this moment, this present moment. I can see what happened just before this present moment, but I have no more perspective on what's going on. I can't get ahead. I'm in present tense. So point of view and verb tense for me, two huge decisions that I make when I start thinking about how a character is going to populate the scene. And I go back and forth on them. So that ended up being a long talk about point of view and verb tense. So hopefully that's interesting for you. And I'll try to speed through the rest of it a little bit more. In terms of showing the characters living in the world, this is sort of the main theme of what I'm trying to talk about in week 3 here. You have your characters, you have your world, and the world reveals itself and to the reader as the characters move through it. And I may have mentioned before that we do a lot of research in historical fiction, and we learn a lot about these worlds. And we may feel that we need to bring the reader up to speed and tell them all about this world we're in, or tell them all about this place we're in, and you don't. You can just like dive in. So again, I'll go a little more quickly through the first chapter of Orphan Number 8, which has been like our example chapter here, and you're getting really familiar with it now. I've talked before about the research that goes into some of the elements of the world. And just noticing as you look through it that you learn all about their apartment through the way the characters interact with it, how they come and go, nickels in the gas meter, boarders in the front room, children under the kitchen table. The bedroom is right next to the kitchen. The sink in the kitchen is the only sink in the house. The toilets are down the hall. The neighbor can pretty much hear most everything and comes to help. The clothing that they wear is revealed as they put it on or take it off. Some short descriptions, but not a whole lot. What they eat is revealed as they eat. They put it on the table. They stir the jelly into their tea. They soak their stale bread so that they can eat it because it's like really hard. I could have said, they lived in this tenement apartment, but instead you just see it happening as the characters interact with it. I'm just looking through if there's some new examples for me to point out, because otherwise this will be familiar to you from the things that I've used this chapter as an example for in my previous lectures. So I don't know if I've mentioned to you before on page 11, Visha says something to her neighbor. She's like, oh, look at this teapot got broken because Rachel knocked it over. And the neighbor says, do you want to borrow mine? And Visha shook her head, gesturing to a high shelf above the sink. I'll use the good ones for my Seder dishes. So this is revealing about the character's religious background. When we go to the factory later in the chapter, here are some moments where I'm balancing describing the place with the characters moving through it. And again, making a decision. So part of what I'm trying to do in these videos is talk to you about the decision that went into, or the thinking that went into the decision that led to what you're seeing on the page. So most of the tenement apartment is revealed little by little as the characters move through it. On page 14 of this chapter, we get to the shirtwaist factory, the garment factory. We're not going to spend much time here. We need to see it. Again, I know ridiculously more about this from my research than I'm going to bother putting in. But there's a paragraph in the middle of page 14 where I just, as the narrator, third person, past tense, I'm just going to tell the reader, sort of economically, trying to describe things in evocative ways the reader can kind of picture it, but we do not need to worry too much about this. We're never going to be here again. So we have a description, the factory. The open floor was punctuated by iron poles that reached up to the ceiling. Without walls to block the big windows, the space was bright, dust and threads floating through streaks of sunlight. Could have had a metaphor there. They floated through the sunlight like the dandelions, on a summer breeze. But this is not a place for figurative language. This is a place for clear description. Again, where does it warrant that kind of attention? If we're going to spend a lot of time in this factory, maybe more figurative language, more metaphor would be appropriate. It would set a tone or a mood, but we just want to know where we are. Long tables stretched across the floor, one sewing machine yoked to the next, at each a woman hunched over her work. Runners were moving around the factory, delivering pieces of cloth to the operators and picking up the baskets of finished goods at their feet. In the corner, some little girls sat on the floor, the younger ones threading needles and the older ones, 11 or 12, sewing buttons onto the gauzy blouses piled around them. I use the verb yoked because the sewing machines, there would be like one big gear turning, and then it would each sewing machine would get its power that way. So, but again, it's not a treatise on the garment industry. So in there, that's it's like, where are we? Usually we are showing the characters interacting with the world, and that's how the world is revealed. The big decisions about point of view, verb tense, these are the things that will really help to set the scene and set the tone for what you're writing in historical fiction. I've just looked through the whole rest of that chapter. I don't know that there's anything else I want to really focus on. So I'm going to read you an example from Counting Lost Stars that is, again, going to be another example of learning about the world through the character. And this is a bit more through the character interacting with the world, as well as the character's thoughts about it. So Counting Lost Stars is a novel in which a young woman in 1960s New York is in school learning to be a computer programmer. And the other time period is about Cornelia Vogel in World War II Netherlands, and she's working at what I've called the Ministry of Information, a fictional place based on the population registry that was real. And they're using punch card computers to conduct their census and manage their population information, which was true. And I'm really fascinated with this sort of early technology. They're kind of an early computer with punch cards. And so this is a paragraph where Cornelia, who's working with the computers, is thinking about them and interacting with her world through her actions and her thoughts. So Cornelia is now working with these computers, and it's a little bit of a long paragraph, but I think it's going to be a good example of what I'm talking about in terms of all the things coming together: point of view, verb tense, the character, revealing the character through their thoughts, and then populating the world with that character. So she's at work. With the sorting machine set up, Cornelia wheels over the cart with the boxes of punch cards. She holds one up to the light, curious. The pattern of perforation seems random, their significance a mystery to human eyes. Yet Cornelia, like an astronomer searching for stars in the night sky, understands that each prick of light shining through the card is a dot of information that, when taken together with all the others, becomes meaningful. It's a strange language, she thinks, this scattering of absences. The explorers who discovered the Rosetta Stone had no idea at first what the shapes chiseled into granite meant, but they could recognize that the pictures represented words, that the words, when read, would tell a story. Cornelia wonders what someone from the future, unearthing this trove, will make of the thousands of pieces of paper riddled with millions of minuscule holes. Unlike the letters of an alphabet or the pictograms of hieroglyphics, the meaning of the holes depends entirely on the particular code for each job. But even if this future explorer miraculously found a matching codebook, the cards would remain mute. This is a soundless language no mouth can give voice to. It was invented for the Hollerith machine. Only the computer can make the cards speak. This is a paragraph that happens almost 100 pages into the book. And in that paragraph, a couple of things I'll point out to you. She references the Rosetta Stone. She talks about hieroglyphics. These are things that character would have to know or be able to know. So if the character references things that character it would be strange for that character to know them. Even though it's in third person and she's not speaking for herself, that would ring false. You hear it's in the present tense. That's a paragraph that does a whole lot of work for me. It describes what she's doing with these computers, and it also actually sets up a theme that will unfold in the plot of the novel, because it's informing the reader. How does this world work? There are these punch cards with little holes in them. They mean nothing. You need to know the code. What does that hole mean? A punch through number 8 in column 15, like what does it correspond to? Could be anything. Even if you have the codes and the cards, unless you're going to sit and look at each single one, which is not how these things are designed to work, you need to run them through a machine to get the results. And actually, in the novel, Counting Lost Stars, that's exactly what's going to happen. There is a lost trove of punch cards. Someone does still have the code book. They find a machine that can process them, and bringing them all together is going to give them an answer to the question that runs through the novel. So it's a paragraph that kind of subconsciously is informing the reader of something really important that they need to understand as the plot unfolds, while the character is interacting with the world. And again, just to remind you, none of this happens on your first draft. All of this stuff kind of evolves over multiple drafts. That paragraph, sometimes I'll write a paragraph and I know this is a really important paragraph in terms of kind of a theme, an idea that's going to be really crucial in this story. But that paragraph was in like a different chapter at first, and it moves around until it finds its right place. So I think that paragraph moved about 75 pages from beginning. In Orphan number 8, I had a paragraph that moved 300 pages. So these are the things that happen as you're developing and revising. I think that we may start talking a bit more about development and revision in week 4, as we talk about like the whole component of a scene And I've already talked about point of view, choosing your verb tense. Yeah, I'm moving through the topics a little faster than I thought I might. So I hope that it's working for you. And obviously, anytime you have questions, you're going to leave them in our classroom, and I'll respond to them. So I talked about a lot of stuff today, and I'll stop talking now, and I'll join you again for one more video about developing the whole scene and pulling everything together.